Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies, where we explore all things cinema. I want to welcome to the show Filippo Ulivieri, who is a writer and lecturer, described by the New York Times as Italy's leading Kubrick expert. He is the author of Stanley Kubrick and Me, 30 Years at His Side, a biography of Kubrick's personal assistant Emilio D'Alessandro, which he adapted into the film S is for Stanley, winner of the David D. Donatello Award for Best Documentary Feature. His forthcoming book, which includes a comprehensive study of Kubrick's mythological persona, is Cracking the Cube, Solving the Mysteries of Stanley Kubrick through Archival Research. Filippo, thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
It's great to have you. And today we're discussing Neil Hornick's book called The Magic Eye, The Cinema of Stanley Kubrick, which he wrote in the late 60s, and we're only just recently getting now out for Kubrick lovers to read, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
Before we get into the book, can you just talk a little bit about what made you a Kubrick fan yourself? What got you into Kubrick's films?
Well, yeah. Well, I absolutely love films and filmmaking, and I'm very passionate about art in general. And my Kubrick obsession started by chance. Yeah, I've seen a few of his films and thought he was a very good artist. And little by little, things evolved. When I was in my university for one of the exams, I had to build a website, which were quite of a novelty back then.
Hmm.
So I decided to do a website about Kubrick, and the website was quite big for the standards at the time. So it was noticed by a friend of Emilio D'Alessandro, who was Kubrick's assistant, and the website must have done a good impression because then I was asked by Emilio to write his memoirs. And after the book came out, I thought that there was an opportunity to write about Kubrick in a different way, which is not a critical study of his films, which there were already plenty of books of that kind, but more like in a document driven way, either by interviewing people or visiting the Kubrick archive to actually learn how he made his films.
Hmm.
And so I wrote the book that you were mentioning earlier, Cracking the Cube, actually was published 1 year ago, so it's out now. And it's a sum of all my essays and studies on Kubrick's modus operandi and how to produce a film that still resonates with us and is landmarks of filmmaking.
Well, I haven't I plan to read your books, but I the documentary I love. That's just for Stanley. I
Yeah,
thought that was fantastic.
thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, there's a bit of a difference between the book, which is of course a richer.
Right.
Um, I mean, it's Stanley Kubrick and Me. I think it's about 350 pages. It's 30 years of life
Yeah.
shared by Emilio and Kubrick. And I wrote it as much as possible as a story of two families, Emilio's family and Kubrick's family, who got intertwined. And there was this beautiful and quite unusual, if not weird, relationship between these two men, which were uh, kind of opposite because Kubrick is very intellectual, or he was perceived and he is perceived as a very intellectual, while Emilio is a very simple man who did not do any type of sophisticated study. He only did the primary school in Italy, then moved to England. He wanted to be a racing car driver, so he had nothing to do with cinema, but he ended up being at the center of the best filmmaking that was
Mm.
happening in the UK. So it's a very unusual story, and I wrote it as much as possible as a sort of a fairy tale, actually. And the director of the film, Alex Infascelli, when he contacted me, he understood the core, the emotional core of the story immediately. So I was very, very happy when we discussed the possibility of making a film with him, that he saw Emilio's story basically in the same way that I did, which is an emotional blend of different experiences that somehow clicked.
Mm,
And Emilio and Kubrick were basically spending their days together all the time, sharing things, and it was just. I tried to convey in the pages a sense of being with them, a sense of being present with Emilio and Kubrick, and Alex in the documentary tries to do the same. So we were on the same wavelength, the director and I. So it was a very pleasant experience to see the words that I wrote on the page being turned into, you know, scenes in the film, even if it's a documentary. But it was fascinating for me to see the differences between the written and the visual medium.
mm. Did you ever meet Neil Hornick?
Unfortunately, I didn't. I spoke with him a couple of times on the telephone. We corresponded via email a lot before and while the book was edited and eventually published. And we tried to organize the meeting in London, but for, you know, it was one of those sad things in life when you stupidly postpone things, and he died sadly last year.
Yeah.
So we kind of waited for the book to be published, and then we can do a launch in London. We can meet there, but then the book wasn't happening. And when I went to London, he was not in the city. So for some strange and sad chances, we never met, but we talked on the telephone, and I have very fond memories of Neil. He was extremely happy that his book was finally published, and um, he and I shared a mutual passion for filmmaking, films in general, a document-driven approach. So we discussed many things, and he was very curious to understand and to know my background as I was to understand his. So we started discussing not only his book but also his life in the theater
Hmm.
and backgrounds in the, you know, film, some film festivals that I organized in Italy. It was a very short but very intense long distance friendship that we developed. And I was rereading some of our emails this morning before chatting with you, and I was kind of pleasantly surprised at the sort of intensity that we shared, even if for a brief moment of time, and even if we never met in person. But I would have loved to. And again, it's quite sad that in the end we only cheered at the book's publication over the telephone and not in
Hmm.
person.
How did you get the opportunity to write the forward in the book?
I was contacted by Paul Cronin, who is the publisher and editor of the book, because he knew that I was studying Kubrick's image, public image, and reputation, and he thought that this little story of how Kubrick prevented Neil Hornick's book's publication could fit into what I was exploring and I was discussing with Paul, which is Kubrick's masterminding his own image to build the mythological Stanley Kubrick. And I discussed this idea with several of Kubrick's collaborators, such as Mike Kaplan, who was responsible for the marketing and publicity of 2001: Space Odyssey and The Clockwork Orange, or Julian Senior from Warner Brothers. And so this story of how Kubrick decided not to um, well, actually, he decided to halt the publication of Neil Hornick's book, fitted into what I was trying to expose, which is Kubrick's way of building his own mystique.
Mm.
So Paul asked me if I wanted to study the documents that Neil had, which was for me a fantastic opportunity because nobody had looked into all the papers and letters and the contract that Neil still had for the book. And so I was able to connect the documents that Neil had with the documents that Alexander Walker, the author of the book that eventually took the place of Neil's book, Stanley Kubrick Directs. I studied these papers, Walker's papers, already when I was in Italy because they are donated. They were donated by Walker to an Italian film museum, and so I already knew the Walker side of the story. But until I had the opportunity to study Neil's document, I did not know actually how these the fact that Kubrick swapped one book for another helped him to obtain the last piece of the puzzle he still needed, which is the appraisal, the positive consideration from film critics. Because up until that point, Kubrick was already a well-established and very famous and widely appreciated filmmaker. But 2001 had a mixed review, was sorry, a mixed reception within the film critics, especially from New York. So the critical reputation that Kubrick had in that period was still uncertain, and I feel that he needed some way to finally won the Kubrick's appreciation. And he did that by asking Walker to write the first book on his films and discarding what Neil already had written.
Mm. And do you think it has? I know we touched on it, and of course it's written about in the book. But do you think the fact that it was more of a mixed reception to Kubrick's films, that Kubrick just wanted this to be to not have any criticisms of his films. It had, he wanted like Walker's book, which is just like he just talks that he loves every single film and that's it. Like, do you think that has a lot to do with it?
Well, there are several factors, I
Yeah.
think. The only thing that Kubrick did say to Hornick through one of his collaborators was that in the book, Hornick gives the impression of a balance between the good and bad qualities for each film. I don't think that's true because the book is very praising of Kubrick's
Yeah.
film and even gushing for 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
I think that, well, Kubrick might have been a little bit irked by some of the criticism which is in there in the pages. But I think that, oh, my theory is that it was not what Kubrick wanted because it was a book that contextualized Kubrick's work within the Hollywood filmmaking industry. Hornick detailed the struggle of Kubrick during his first years. He also included interviews with Kubrick's collaborators, especially James B. Harris, Kubrick's producing partner, which had an enormous importance to develop and to develop Kubrick artistry. While if you compare it to Walker's book, there are no other voice in Walker's book other than Kubrick's. So that might have been another issue. But I think that in the end, is the thing is that Hornick's book contextualizes Kubrick, it humanizes him, and it's not the image that comes out of Hornick's book is not the image that Kubrick wanted to have. It did not want it to be seen as a very good filmmaker. He wanted to be seen as a genius. He wanted to be seen as a force of absolute power. He wanted to be seen as extremely original. And all the things that he was trying to build for himself in the interviews that he gave by talking with the journalists and reporters, Hornick was not could not have been a part of this plan. So I think that's the reason why ultimately he decided to ask Walker for a book that was not only praising but could help him establish himself as a relevant filmmaker for the critics.
And how do you feel about how the book turned out? I mean, what was your initial reaction after reading it?
I was very surprised by how good the book is and how well written, because I thought that coming from theater, I did not know that actually Neil, when I first started studying the papers, I did not know that Neil could write as good as he did, in fact.
Mm.
So the book was absolutely a pleasure to read, and I'm not used to read criticism a lot because I think that for Kubrick, I mean, I've read lots and lots of books about criticism on Kubrick, and they ultimately seem to basically say the same arguments over and over again. And I was extremely surprised to finally read a book that was piercing, that offered real insights how the films worked on an aesthetic level, on a story level, on a thought level. I mean, this book is really is as good as a film criticism book can be, I think. And when I talked to Neil, he was kind of shy and thought that I was playing the Walker to his book, meaning that I was over praising his book out of just kindness to him.
Mm.
And I had a hard time convincing that I really thought it's a very very good book on Kubrick. But yeah, I mean, it really is a book that needs to be read because it opens our imagination. It's a valued contribution for people interested in Kubrick. Yeah, and it's quite original
Yeah.
uh, because it contains things that are very piercing, very insightful, and it's not what you would expect from a common Kubrick aficionado. And if you think that this was actually the first book that was ever written about Kubrick, it becomes even more astonishing, actually,
Mm.
that it is so good.
Hmm. Can you I mean, like you said, there's so many books on Kubrick. Can you just talk a
Yeah.
little bit about what makes this one different compared to, is it the fact that it's not that they don't he doesn't gush over Kubrick? Not, well, he does to an extent, but
Yeah.
as much as maybe other writers do, like Walker, is that the big difference?
Well, there are several differences, I think. In that time, it was not easy for people to watch a movie after the theatrical distribution was completed. So there was always the need to summarize the plot.
Yeah.
And if the film critic is not good enough, there's a risk of using too much of too many pages on the plot and not too much on critical appraisal. But Hornick is very good at summarizing the plots quickly, but very effectively. And again, if you compare it with Walker, I don't think that Walker is that good. Walker was very good as a writer because his books are always eminently readable, but I don't think that he was very good at providing insights into the films.
Mm.
So Hornick uh, summarizes the plots quickly, And then he provides a context for each film and what Kubrick wanted to achieve, what was the source, the literary source of the book. So he gives a summary of the production part of the film, as much as it was possible in those years
Right.
where he only could do with a few books that were published already, a few essays on magazines. But and this is another thing that I said to Neil, that I was astonished at how good his research was, because he was quoting from many different newspapers, many different magazines, and I today I find it difficult to find all the sources that I need with, libraries and the internet. He had to physically go to the BFI in London to browse through physical copies of the magazine. So in a single year of time that he spent writing the book and researching the book, I was astonished at how good he was at doing research. And in fact, there is more information in this little book by Neil than it is in the Walker's thick
Mm.
tome. So it's again, even if it deals up to 2001: A Space Odyssey only, because it was written in 1969 and 1970. But it's a very, very good introduction and critical examination of the first half of Kubrick's career.
Was there anything in the book that you felt you disagreed with in terms of his some of his criticisms of any of Kubrick's films?
Well, not really. Maybe he was a little bit harsh on
Lily,
Lolita,
I was just gonna say, yeah.
because I mean, it is true what Neil said in the book, that the style of the film is disappointing if you
Mm,
compare it to the style of Paths of Glory, or later Doctor Strangelove. And but perhaps it was a bit ungenerous to define Lolita as a standard British comedy,
mm,
um, or to say that it was an actor's uh, picture, in more than a director's
yeah,
film. But actually, this criticism is intriguing, because in an interview that I found among Walker's pages, which was not published, Kubrick himself defined Lolita an actor's film more than a director's film. So I
right.
always wondered if this criticism that he must have read in Hornick's book sort of convinced him, or if Hornick somehow considered Lolita in the same way that Kubrick himself considered it, which is partly a disappointment.
Right. Hmm.
Um,
The the last question I had was I thought it was interesting that he wrote about that Max Ophuls was an influence on Kubrick,
mhm.
which I never dawned on me, but I can see it now. Can you talk a little bit about why that how that is?
Well, I think that Hornick learned about Kubrick's fascination with the Fools thanks to an interview that he found in a French magazine, which back then was not translated into English. It was from Positif magazine.
Yeah.
And it's a quite a famous interview now, and it's been republished in several anthologies, because Kubrick talks extensively about his career up to 2001: A Space Odyssey, and he himself talks about his fascination and admiration of Fools' work. And Neil describes this fascination, especially for Paths of Glory. There are scenes that are conceived and shot exactly how Ophuls might have done, because you see these characters swirling around a backdrop of a very elegant chateau rooms, And this way of using the camera to embrace the actors and to develop the story in a very elegant and sophisticated way is used in Paths of Glory to portray the life of the general and to distantiate it stylistically from that of the soldiers in the mud and in the um, can't the English word now escapes me, but in the trenches.
Right.
And Kubrick admired Ophuls, and in fact, you can see traces of Ophuls in Eyes Wide Shut as well. The scene between Alice and Sandor Zavost, Nicole Kidman, and the actor, can't remember his name now, sorry. It is shot exactly as a scene from Max Ophul's the Jewels of Madame de. And you can see exactly the same rhythm, the same camera movement. And it is something that Kubrick discussed in that interview that Hornick was able to find and to discuss and include in the book.
Well, again, the book is called The Magic Eye, The Cinema of Stanley Kubrick by Neil Hornick. I'll leave the link in the there you go, there it is. I'll leave the link in the description box where you can get it from Sticking Place Books. Filippo, if people want to follow you on social media or check out anything you're working on, where can they go?
Well, I have a YouTube channel, and I also am on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and I have a few books in English, Stanley Kubrick and Me, the story of Emilio D'Alessandro. S is for Stanley, the film is also available in an international English language. Another book of mine is 2001 2001 Between Kubrick and Clarke, which deals with the genesis, the making, and the authorship of 2001 A Space Odyssey. And the latest book is Cracking the Cube, solving the mysteries of Stanley Kubrick through archival research.
Wow. Fantastic. Well, I'll leave the links in the description box for where you can follow Filippo on social media and check out his YouTube channel as well. So, Filippo, thank you again so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, it has been, and I hope you can come again sometime down the road and
yes, sure.
talk some more. Those of you watching at home, yeah, thank you. Those of you watching at home, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next episode. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. If this is your first time here, please consider subscribing by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the Movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left. In just a second, just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes. It is absolutely free to subscribe. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you are interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, I'd really appreciate the support. Please go to patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the Movies for full details. Thank you again, everyone, for watching, and I will see you all in the next episode.